Okay, this is Skeletal System Part 2. I think this is where we left off. We're not going very in depth at all in this chapter, so it's just some basic ideas. Um, so, bone matrix is the kind of background structure, the background medium of bone. Really silly analogy, but some people aren't comfortable with the word matrix. In a blueberry muffin, the cake part is the matrix, the blueberries are not the matrix. And that analogy becomes useful because the blueberries are kind of like the bone cells, and the matrix is the hard mineral part, the hard stuff that we think of as bones. It's made of calcium phosphate, um, also of some collagen, which gives it some elasticity. And um, collagen is kind of a tough, fibrous, yet somewhat elastic protein. So the bone cells are osteocytes, and these individual bone cells are embedded within the mineral matrix, like the blueberries are embedded in the cakey part of a blueberry muffin. So in this picture, the yellow stuff is the matrix. This is a bone cell. And notice they're always alone. They're always individual. We're going to look at a lot of other pictures which help you understand them better. These are little tiny canals. They have this funny name. It's blurry here, canalically, which are kind of like tiny tunnels inside the bone matrix, inside the hard mineral part, which allow blood vessels and nerves to reach it. Okay, in this other picture, you'll see that bones have this funny cylindrical shape or structure to them. So in this structural thing, the purpley fuchsia things are bone cells. The central part is where major blood vessels and nerves pass. And these are the tiny little canaliculi, these tiny little tunnels which allow the blood vessels to reach the bone cells. And they tend to form these funny cylindrical shapes, which are called osteons. So if you're confused, don't worry. The next set of diagrams will clarify it. First, I wanted to show you a real photograph because it's so cool. It's so surprising, I think. This is really a photograph of bone. So the matrix is this rock-like stuff, right? That's the background. These are the bone cells. Here's another one. And they live in, they're like little caves that they're found in, right? Lacuna is this little hole or cave-like structure um, inside the bone in which in which dwells the little bone cells. It's a silly image. I call them caves. It's silly of me. I think of them as like little hermits living alone because each bone cell is alone inside a rock cave the bone has hollowed out a little spot for it. And you can see all the canaliculi, all the little vessels which need to reach them because they need to be nourished, right? The hard mineral matrix is like rock, doesn't need nourishment, but these are living bone cells. They need to have blood and nutrients reach them, and they need to get rid of their waste, like all cells. So they need to have um, both arteries and veins and so on. Okay, another photograph of bone structure. So you can see this is a cross section, thin piece of bone. You can see the osteon. These are the individual bone cells. And you can see the central part, which will have the blood vessels and also some nerves. Okay, here is a diagram. So from this diagram, you just need to understand the basics. This is one osteon. This is another half an osteon, another osteon. So these cylindrical shapes, it's the pattern in which bone arranges itself. When you zoom in on it, you see that what each one of these little tiny black dots was, look what it was, a bone cell, right? So they're arranged in these funny circular patterns. And you see how this is the hard matrix, this cream colored part, and there's like a little tiny cave. Something's been carved out of that hard rock thing for the bone cell to dwell in, right? So the osteocytes dwell in lacuna. And so these major canals, they're kind of like tunnels, are the pathway, if you will, the place where blood vessels can reach the bone cells. And so the major canals, central canals, and so on, there's ones that go vertically, ones that are horizontal, and then they branch out into these tiny little canals, canalically, right, which reach the bone cells. Okay, this is just another view of the same thing. I'm hoping it all makes sense, right? Individual bone cells. Here's a close-up on individual bone cell, the osteon, and so on. So you might wonder why this is the case. I mean, obviously the matrix is hard, so because our bones are meant to be hard to give us structure and support and so on. The cells are there to lay down bone or to remove bone. Strangely enough, the reason that our bones last longer than many artificial materials is because our body is constantly replacing them. It takes away old bone tissue and puts down new bone tissue. That's why an artificial joint, even though it's made of the best materials engineers can find, doesn't last as long as a natural joint, because a natural joint is alive. It's full of living bone tissue, which is being continuously replaced. So they're not there doing nothing. They're maintaining bone, keeping it healthy, and when it gets old, they kind of disintegrate it and make new bone tissue. Okay. This is just another picture of it. Notice that these osteons are happening in compact bone. The spongy bone is the part with the crazy sponge-like holes. All right, one last thing in this unit is a type of joint. It's actually fairly common in the body, called a synovial joint. So synovial joint, what makes it special is that it has a capsule, and the joint area is kind of encapsulated, sealed off. So you can see here this synovial membrane along with the articular cartilage, right? Every joint has articular cartilage to kind of cushion the bone from impact and friction with the other bone, right? But here with the articular cartilage, the synovial membrane makes a capsule, and then the synovial membrane produces and secretes synovial fluid, which is a thick, viscous fluid which is lubricating. And so it reduces friction. It provides a lubricant for your joints. It also acts as a shock absorber, so that if you imagine this person, if this were a knee joint and the person jumps, this here would be having a little bit of shock absorbing effect. The liquid would take some of that impact. And that explains what the girls at home missed, but today we made oobleck, that crazy cornstarchy mixture, which is a non-Newtonian fluid, insofar as when you hit it hard, it solidifies, and when you press it or move it very gently, it's a liquid. And synovial fluid has similar properties. That helps it to be a shock absorber. I think that's everything. So synovial membrane secretes the fluid. There's synovial fluid inside the joint capsule, or the articular capsule. And I think that's all you need to know. There's another type of fluid-filled sac, which are called bursa or bursae, and there's lots of them all over the body. They're not specifically between the bones of the joint, but they're around the joint, and they're countering friction and cushioning in all kinds of ways. You don't need to know these. You might have heard of bursitis. It's a common painful inflammation of those bursa, which causes joint pain. Okay, just wanted to go over with you what you need to do. There's a lot of bone stuff we didn't learn this year. We're just doing the unit in a brief way. Here is the worksheet. You want to be able to label all of these. I think all of the labels are pretty clear. That is obviously the growth plate, the epiphyseal plate. This is, what type of bone is this with all the holes? Spongy bone, and what does it contain? Red bone marrow. In contrast to, this is the big, long marrow cavity, and it contains yellow bone marrow, right? And they each have a different function. You can go back to the first screencast and learn about that. This probably represents articular cartilage, is at the bottom and the top. And here is the growth plate again. Yeah, D and D are the same thing. Here the periosteum and the endosteum are shown, the spongy bone and the compact bone, and so on. Okay, so the next part of the worksheet, I hope all this is clear. This is the vertebral column, which obviously contains, made of many vertebrae, right? And with cartilage discs between them, and it contains the spinal cord, which is actually nerve tissue. And here is our synovial joint, right? So this label might not be very clear. I'm trying to point to the inner lining of the capsule. That inner lining is synovial membrane, and synovial membrane secretes synovial fluid. So this one here, number 2, is meant to be the joint capsule filled with synovial fluid, right? This double one here is meant to point to this, as well as that, and those are the articular cartilage. Okay, and this one here, I believe, would be the growth plate. You can see that strip of cartilage in the middle of the spongy bone. It's usually found at the ends of long bones. All right, I just wanted to go over this because it can be a little bit confusing. I think that's everything. Okay,